Good day, children. Today we will start with Indigo by Louis Fisher. Indigo runs into 9 pages and each audio file will cover 3 pages each. Now, moving on to the lesson. What is indigo? It is a blue dye obtained from a plant. This lesson is interesting because we get to know more about the father of our nation. We have read several books on Gandhi written by Indian writers, and we find that in these writings, Gandhi is placed on a pedestal and is always doing incredible things. But in this book by a Western writer, Louis Fisher, Gandhi is not glorified. Instead, we get to see glimpses of Gandhi doing ordinary things resolutely and with determination. The introduction. Louis Fisher, born in 1896 and died in 1970, was born in Philadelphia. He served as a volunteer in the British Army between 1918 and 1920. Fisher made a career as a journalist and wrote for the New York Times, the Saturday Review, and for European and Asian publications. He was also a member of the faculty at Princeton University. The following is an excerpt from his book, The Life of Mahatma Gandhi. The book has been reviewed as one of the best books ever written on Gandhi by Times Educational Supplement. Now moving on to the lesson. When I first visited Gandhi in 1942 at his ashram in Sevagram in central India, he said, "I will tell you how it happened that I decided to urge the departure of the British. It was in 1970. When I first visited Gandhi, I hear Louis Fisher first visited Gandhi in 1942. So for the first time, he visited Gandhi in 1942 at his ashram in Sevagram in central India. He said, Gandhi said, "I will tell you how it happened." So Gandhi starts narrating to Louis Fisher how it happened that he decided to urge to speed up the departure of the British. So he goes on to narrate about an incident that happened in 1917, which led to the British departing from India quickly. So he starts the narration. He had gone to the December 1916 annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party in Lucknow. So the incident happened in 1917, but the initial incident happened in 1916 when he had gone for the Indian National Congress Party in Lucknow, for the annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party in Lucknow. This was happening in December 1916. There were 2,301 delegates and many visitors. So when he went there, when Gandhi went for this meeting, there were many delegates there. During the proceedings, when the meeting was going on, Gandhi recounted, he remembered and he narrated, "A peasant came up to me looking like any other peasant in India, poor and emaciated." So during the meeting, Gandhi remembers, a peasant came up to me, a peasant approached him, and he looked like any other peasant in India. How did he look? Poor and emaciated. Poor. He looked poor and emaciated. Emaciated, hungry looking. Yeah, looking very feeble and weak. And said, and this peasant who approached Gandhi introduced himself. "I am Rajkumar Shukla. I am from Champaran and I want you to come to my district." So he introduced himself as Rajkumar Shukla. He said that he is from Champaran and he wanted Gandhi to go to his district. Gandhi had never heard of the place. It was in the foothills of the towering Himalayas near the kingdom of Nepal. So he had never heard of this place, Champaran, which is actually located in the present Bihar. Under an ancient arrangement, the Champaran peasants were sharecroppers. So, Shukla was a sharecropper. And in Champaran, there were several sharecroppers. Who is a sharecropper? Sharecropper is a tenant farmer who gives a major share of his crop as rent to the landlord. So, Shukla was also a sharecropper from Champaran. Rajkumar Shukla was one of them. He was illiterate but resolute. So all these sharecroppers were uneducated. Shukla was also uneducated. But he's too different from the others because he was resolute. Resolute means determined. He had come to the Congress session to complain about the injustice of the landlord system in Bihar. And somebody had probably said, speak to Gandhi. So all these sharecroppers in Champaran were facing an injustice at the hands of the British landlords. So they did not know whom to approach. Somebody had suggested to Shukla to go and meet Gandhi. And so he had come to meet Gandhi at this annual convention of the Indian National Congress Party that was being held at Lucknow. And that is the reason now Shukla approaches Gandhi. Gandhi continues with his narration. Gandhi told Shukla he had an appointment in Kanpur and was also committed to go to other parts of India. So this peasant comes and asks Gandhi to go with him to Champaran. But Gandhi says it is not possible because he has an appointment to go to Kanpur and also to go to other parts of India. So Gandhi is busy. Shukla accompanied him everywhere. Then Gandhi returned to his ashram near Ahmedabad. Shukla followed him to the ashram. For weeks, he never left Gandhi's side. So Gandhi kept moving from one place to another because he was committed. Shukla too accompanied him everywhere. Shukla kept following him. Why? Because he was determined that he wanted to take Gandhi to Champaran to solve the problem of injustice. Shukla followed him to the ashram. So after going to different parts, then Gandhi went back to his ashram in Ahmedabad. Shukla followed him to the ashram also. For weeks, he never left Gandhi's side. For weeks, he was with Gandhi. Fix a date, he begged. He pleaded with Gandhi to fix a date to go to Champaran. Impressed by the sharecropper's tenacity and story, Gandhi said, I have to be in Calcutta on such date. Come and meet me and take me from there. So this sharecropper kept following Gandhi everywhere, and Gandhi was impressed by the sharecropper's tenacity. Tenacity means firmness of the mind and story and this injustice that was happening because he wanted to solve the injustice. So Gandhi was impressed with this person. So he said, I have to be in Calcutta on such date. So Gandhi had to go to Calcutta. So since Calcutta was closer to Champaran, come and meet me and take me from there. He asked Shukla to come to Calcutta, and from there he promised that he would go to Champaran. Months passed. Shukla was sitting on his haunches at the appointed spot in Calcutta when Gandhi arrived. So when Gandhi reached Calcutta, he saw that Shukla was already waiting for him there. He was sitting on his haunches sitting on his buttocks. It is an illiterate posture of sitting. So when he reached Calcutta, he found that Shukla was already waiting there. Shukla waited till Gandhi was free. So Gandhi had some business there. He finished everything. Till then, Shukla waited for him patiently. Then the two of them boarded a train for the city of Patna in Bihar. So from Calcutta, Shukla and Gandhi catch a train to go to Patna in Bihar. There, Shukla led him to the house of a lawyer named Rajendra Prasad, who later became the president of the Congress Party and of India. So when they reached Patna in Bihar, Shukla took him to the house of Rajendra Prasad. Rajendra Prasad was out of town, but the servants knew Shukla as a poor yeoman who pestered their master to help the Indigo sharecroppers. So when Shukla took Gandhi to Rajendra Prasad's house, Rajendra Prasad had gone out and only the servants were there. The servants were familiar with Shukla. They knew him to be a very poor peasant. They saw Gandhi along with Shukla and mistook him for another peasant. So they let him stay on the grounds with his companion Gandhi, whom they took to be another peasant. So since they knew Shukla, they asked Shukla and Gandhi to remain in the compound. But Gandhi was not permitted to draw water from the well, lest some drops from his bucket pollute the entire source. How did they know that he was not an untouchable? It was a time when caste system was prevalent and untouchability was at its peak. Shukla was an untouchable. He was allowed to remain out in the yard. They were not offered anything to drink. They had to remain there and they were not given permission to draw water from the well too. Why? If any drop from the bucket falls into the well would get polluted since they were untouchable. These servants were not aware that Gandhi was such a great figure. Gandhi decided to go first to Muzaffarpur, which was en route to Champaran, to obtain more complete information about conditions than Shukla was capable of imparting. So after this incident is told by Louis Fisher to point out about the injustice and to show Gandhi's nature of humility. From there, after meeting Rajendra Prasad, Gandhi decides to go to Muzaffarpur and meet more lawyers in order to find out what actually was the status of the problem in Champaran. So he first decides to go to Muzaffarpur to obtain more complete information about conditions than Shukla was able to impart. Shukla was unable to convey everything because he was uneducated. He accordingly sent a telegram to Professor J.B. Kripalani of the Arts College in Muzaffarpur, whom he had seen at Tagore's Shantiniketan school. So he sends a telegram to Professor J.B. Kripalani, informing him that he would be reaching Muzaffarpur. The train arrived at midnight, 15th April 1917. Kripalani was waiting at the station with a large body of students. Gandhi was such a great nationalist figure, and so Kripalani, who was a professor in a college, waits there for Gandhi with several of his students. Gandhi stayed there for 2 days in the home of Professor Malkani, a teacher in a government school. Gandhi came to Muzaffarpur. He met Professor J.B. Kripalani. He was arranged accommodation at the house of another Professor Malkani, who was a teacher in a government school. It was an extraordinary thing in those days, Gandhi commented, for a government professor to harbor a man like me. In smaller localities, the Indians were afraid to show sympathy for advocates of home rule. So he was provided shelter, accommodation at the home of Professor Malkani, who was a teacher in a government school. Gandhi narrates about this incident to show that it was really unusual for a person employed by the British to provide support for a person who was an advocate of home rule. Gandhi was gaining popularity because he was fighting against the Britishers. So for Gandhi, who was fighting against the Britishers, to be provided shelter at the home of a person who was appointed by the British was really unusual. In the smaller localities, Indians were afraid to show support to these people who advocated, who preached for home rule. The news of Gandhi's arrival, and of the nature of his mission spread quickly through Muzaffarpur and to Champaran. That a great figure like Gandhi had come to Muzaffarpur to solve the issue of the sharecroppers of Champaran. This news spread very quickly and people came to meet him. Sharecroppers from Champaran began arriving on foot and by conveyance to see their champion, to see the person who was fighting for their cause. Muzaffarpur lawyers called on Gandhi to brief him. All the lawyers who had so far been fighting this legal battle came to meet Gandhi to brief him on what they had done so far. They frequently represented peasant groups in court. So far they had been fighting this battle of injustice in the court. They told him about their cases and reported the size of their fee. So as they were talking to Gandhi, they told about what they had done so far and how much fees they had been charging from these poor sharecroppers. Gandhi chided the lawyers for collecting big fee from the sharecroppers. When Gandhi heard about this, he was really annoyed. He scolded, chided means to scold. He scolded the lawyers for taking a big amount as fee from the sharecroppers. He said, I have come to the conclusion that we should stop going to law courts. So, again, this extract written by Louis Fisher tells us about how Gandhi went to the base level and tried to sort out all the issues. That is why Gandhi was different. So here there was an issue of the injustice happening to the sharecroppers of Champaran. That was a major issue. But actually, why did this issue begin? Why were the sharecroppers exploited? Because they were afraid of the Britishers. So Gandhi realized that. Gandhi identifies the real problem and decides to find a solution to this problem than to the major issue. He knows that if he finds out a solution to this minor issue, the major issue will dissolve itself. Gandhi said, I have come to the conclusion that we should stop going to law courts. So he says that going to law courts is in vain. Taking such cases to the courts does little good. It is not going to benefit the sharecroppers. Where the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken, law courts are useless. So he identifies the real problem. So what is the solution? This time Gandhi has come to save them. Another time another injustice occurs, who will come to save them? So the main issue here is to solve the fear that these sharecroppers have. So where the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken, law courts are useless. They can be easily intimidated. So first, the fear has to be overcome. The real relief for them is to be free from fear. So Gandhi wants to teach them how to stand on their feet and to fight the British on their own without being intimidated by them. So the first audio file is over. Exercises will follow. Please complete it, children. Thank you.